Hi, good morning. Welcome to the Washington Student Achievement Council Spring Training Webinar Series. This session is going to be covering the Washington application for state financial aid and state aid residency requirements. A little bit of housekeeping. The session is going to be recorded and will be made available on our website. Please note that all participants are muted. If you wish to ask a question, please type your question in the question box located in your control panel. Questions will be sent to our session moderators before being responded to. We will respond to as many questions as possible. If we're unable to respond during our time together today, we will follow up directly with the person posing the question. Again, thank you for joining us today. I'm Gabrielle Matol-Wurst, and I am the Assistant Director for Need-Based Programs. And I will be going over the WASFA portion of the webinar, and I will be turning it over to Gail for the state aid residency requirements after. So I am going to take myself off of the computer so you can't see me anymore. And we're going to go straight into the session. Okay, so today we're going to go over what the WASFA is, going to go over some awarding guidance. Also going to go over how to access the WASFA and discuss some of the WASFA enhancements that we've made over the year. So what is the Washington Application for State Financial Aid, otherwise known as the WASFA? Well, the WASFA is the application for a student to complete if they don't qualify for the federal financial assistance and they can't do the FAFSA. And this is usually because of their immigration status. What the WASFA is it's not an additional funding source. Many times we have students who say they didn't qualify for the WASFA or they didn't get the WASFA, confusing that with the state need grant, Washington College grant. So we always try to clarify that the WASFA is the application for aid. The colleges use this WASFA to determine state and institutional need-based aid awarding. Okay, so like the FAFSA, the students are going to complete the WASFA every year, and it is available online as of October 1st each year, just like the FAFSA. They access the WASFA on our Ready, Set, Grad page. And we wanted to really stress the fact that we at WASAC are very committed to protecting the confidentiality of the information and the privacy of the students and their families. We understand that this filling out the WASFA can be sensitive issues for some people, and they do have fears regarding their citizenship status. So we always wanted to express that we really do take their confidentiality very, very seriously. So with that, any data collected on the WASFA can only be used for the sole purpose of determining eligibility for state financial aid programs. Cannot be used for any other purposes besides institutional aid. You can use it for that, but it can't be used for any other purpose. The privacy statement we have posted on the Ready, Set, Grad page. They can see it when they are completing their WASFA. Below I have the WASFA privacy statement posted, but you can go ahead and, if you are interested in it, go back and read it on the website. How many applications do we get a year? Well, the number of WASFA students completing the WASFA has increased since 2016. They continue to go up. If you look at the 6-month count from 1920 to this year, 2021, both of those application cycles are still open. So we don't have information yet on how many Washington College Grant or College Bound awards for those students yet. But I did want to mention that I ran the numbers on Monday for the 2021 year. So as of Monday, we had 3,361 applications. And so then I ran the numbers again for the 2019 year with the same time period, and it came out to 3,359 students. So very close in the numbers. So I found that very interesting that we were so close. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some basic awarding guidance. As we mentioned, the WASFA, it runs parallel to the FAFSA. So it's basically the same application, missing a couple of questions that are not applicable to people who are not residents or citizens, should I say. We want to make sure that all students are treated equitably and they all have equitable opportunity to funding. So we do ask that any student who completes the WASFA is given the same consideration as any student filing the FAFSA. They cannot be treated any differently. So when you're doing your awarding, we ask that you utilize the same process you use for the FAFSA filers for our WASFA filers. When the students complete their WASFA, their residency should have already been determined or will be determined by the admissions office at time of admissions. If you find any conflicting information, we do suggest that you work directly with your residency officer at your college to fix the conflicting information or to get that straightened out. The affidavit for residency is part of the WASFA application. And so we do ask that you work in coordination with your other offices to ensure that the student doesn't end up having to complete more than one residency affidavit. So what you'll be able to see a little bit into this presentation is that you'll be able to just review residency information in the portal, and that can be shared with your residency officer. Okay, so again, students applying using a WASFA are to be verified in a similar manner as students applying with the FAFSA. If you find any conflicting information, you'll need to verify with the student. So work directly with the student to get any conflicting information cleared up. Unlike the FAFSA, there is no automatic verification process. So again, you need to do that on your own if you find anything. And also, one difference from the FAFSA is students filing the WASFA, they're not required to file tax returns. So in those instances, you cannot request for them to go back and file, and you will just evaluate their applications in the same manner as you would any other non-tax filer. Okay, so funding for students who complete a WASFA. So students who complete the WASFA are eligible to receive CBS and WCG as long as they meet all eligibility requirements. So any CBS scholar that meets the eligibility must be awarded the CBS, and all students who meet eligibility as of 2021 who meet eligibility and have need must be awarded the Washington College grant. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the WASFA interface. It's how do you find your WASFA applications? You use the WASFA interface in the WASAC portal to access your institution's WASFA applicants. If you don't have that access permission to view the WASFAs, you'll need to contact your institutional administrator, who will be able to give you that permission in the portal. The applicant information is available in the WASAC interface the day after the student submits their WASFA. So it does take overnight to process. It goes through the system through to Regent, where they calculate the EFC and they return it back to WASAC. And the schools who have been added on that student's WASFA have access to the application by the next morning. You will only be able to see applications, the WASFAs, for students who added your school as one of the institutions they authorized to send it to. All right, you'll be able to view results on screen or download the results in a CSV or ISER format, which is convenient when you need to share it with other departments in your campus. You have the option to select all applicants for a particular year and or only specific transactions or new transactions. Transactions are considered new until downloaded in the ISER format. So you'll continue to see a little new icon on those until you do download them. And there's many different ways to search for the individual students. You can go by Social Security, their DACA number, ITIN, WASFA ID, or you can search by name or date of birth. And you can also download just the residency information for students versus all of their complete applications. So here's a screenshot of what the WASFA interface looks like. You can see that you're going to be able to select the year. You can show new transactions only. There's the ISER download. And there's some tips on searching your students. If a lot of people have the same names, similar names, if you just do by first name and date of birth or real small combinations of personal information, you tend to get a better selection and more narrowed down field of applicants. Okay. So I had mentioned that on the WASFA interface, you could select the residency data only. There is a data only radio button, which you will click and then click search. And below will come up all the names of the students along with their residency information. So you don't have to go through each and every application to determine their residency. You can just pull it up here or download it. Okay, so then we're just going to go run on to the WASFA Enhancements. In this last year, we added the special circumstances question, which was new because we're trying to make sure that we are mirroring the FAFSAs. In these instances, students are able to choose the special circumstances option, which states that they are unable to provide parent information. And so the application will not ask for parent information. It will not ask for a parent signature. And the students will submit it to your institution. So currently, we are asking the financial aid administrators to work directly with your students who select this option. If you decide that you're going to approve it, you would just use the information submitted as is. And however, if you decide not to approve their special circumstances, you're going to want to work with the student and ask them to resubmit their WASFA, adding in their parent information and resubmit. And then you would reevaluate after they do that. Then coming for the year 2021, we are adding the option for students to choose the gender X to be consistent with the state laws. And we're continuing to work towards the ability for financial aid administrators to make corrections to the WASFA. When we implemented the special circumstances, it was a complex process. And in the process, during the implementation, it did cause some other issues with the applications, unfortunately. In one instance, it did cause some of the students' WASFAs to lock, which means that they either may or may not have clicked the special circumstances box, clicked it and unclicked it, and it made it lock. So it was unable for them to request for parents' information or to have it signed by parents. We do have a list of students that has happened to. We will work directly with the impacted schools. But in the meantime, we do recommend that the schools will download new WASFAs for students just to see if there are any new ones. And we will let you know when we do have the other ones loaded. Okay, and then another issue that came up is that some of the EFCs were not properly calculated. We do have a list of the students who were impacted, and we are currently fixing those records in the portal. These students are going to have a new transaction number with a process date of 5/8/2020. So we do recommend that you download the WASFAs for students with this date, this transaction date, and review them carefully. Like I said, we do have a list of these students, and we're going to work closely with the schools in resolving any awarding issues that may have occurred due to this issue. If you have any questions regarding this, feel free to email me directly or email our WCG email box, and we will work with you on these issues, okay? Thank you. Finally, there's also some missing transactions. We discovered that some of the students' WASFA submissions were not being received from Regent. We found this out when a student would contact us saying that they submitted, but the school didn't have. So we discovered this, and we are working on having it fixed in the system. But the current fix that we have is that we are asking students to resubmit a WASFA. So if you have students that tell you that they submitted a WASFA but you don't have it, ask them to resubmit, and it should generate a new one overnight. And or we will send you a copy of their WASFA in PDF format through the secure portal. Anytime, or if we hear about it first, we will contact you and send you the information. And we're hopefully anticipating this to be corrected in the coming weeks when we have a new upgrade to the system. And that concludes the portion of the WASFA session. Here's our contact information. If you have any questions, and again, if you have specific questions regarding students, please contact us at wcg@wasoc.wa.gov. And so now I wanted to see if anybody has any questions.
Thanks so much, Gabi. This is Becky. There has been a few questions. I'm just going to ask you a couple right now, and then we'll save the rest. Those of you that have sent in your questions so far know that we have received them. But in the interest of moving this along and making sure that Gail has time, I'm just going to ask you this one, which has to do with, you know, if a financial aid administrator downloads a residency information, does the application still remain flagged as new for a full download?
Good question. I do not believe the new will remain. It should go away with that download. But again, if you experience that it's not going away, give us a call or email us, and we will work with our IT department to make sure that it's functioning properly.
Okay, thank you. So again, those of that have submit questions, many of them have to do with the enhancements and corrections, and we will address those at the end.
Okay, great, thank you. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Gail now. Have a great day, everyone.
You are not able to see me in real life because my webcam doesn't work for this software, but I promise you I am not wearing my pajamas. So just to make sure, I'm not sure if the first part of what I said, my introduction came through, but my name's Gail. I work in our policy and planning department here, and my main policy areas are residents, of course, and I also focus on undocumented and immigrant students, as well as veteran and military affiliated students and transfer. So I'm going to be talking generally about residency picture and then kind of funnel down to how it affects our WASFA filers. So the first slide I want to bring up is just kind of overall residency concepts. So hopefully most of you know all of this information, but our public institutions have an appointed residency officer, which Gabi referred to, and they make the decisions about student residency, especially when a student is determined at admissions to be a non-resident, but the student feels they're a resident. They would work with the residency officer to apply for residency. And again, I'm talking here generally about all students, not just WASFA filers. So with that said, financial aid offices at the publics are really encouraged to create a communication protocol or plan with your residency offices, because you really shouldn't have to be redetermining residency for financial aid purposes, because your residency officer should have already figured that out. And of course, as Gabi mentioned, if you see any conflicts, you definitely want to reach out to make sure that the residency officer sees something that you are seeing that maybe they didn't know. So if you don't have that flow of communication going, we really encourage it, especially those of you who might be newer, reach out to your residency officer. Of course, our private colleges on the phone do not have a residency officer, and so they kind of play that role of residency officer. And so I'm going to try to mention throughout my talk about when private colleges have to think a little differently. And then just some basics. WASAC can't override residency decisions. We sometimes get calls from students who expect us to call the school and tell them to fix their decision, and we aren't able to do that. We can, however, if we think that the decision may have been incorrect, we can talk to the school and figure out what's going on and maybe share information that they didn't realize. A few other things. Once a student has their residency classification determined, it doesn't change unless there's evidence to the contrary. So basically what we mean here is that you're not going back every quarter or semester to double check that a student's residency has remained the same, unless something pops up to you, either because the student tells you or they submit some information that again is kind of a red flag type situation. And then finally, residency is actually determined at every school a student attends. So this is true for if a student applies to multiple institutions and each school determines their residency. It also applies when a student transfers from one school to another. Now, some schools will look at the residency from a previous institution and just use that, but not all schools do that. So just an FYI that it can happen where if a student's residency situation changes in between schools, that the second school may end up giving the student non-residency. So heads up on that. And again, this is just general residency information. So now I'm going to talk about how residency intersects with financial aid. The residency laws that I work on and support residency officers with are about who gets resident tuition. And as of this last legislative session, there are about 30 ways, the way I count them, to qualify for resident tuition at our public colleges and universities. And of course, our financial aid programs use some of those ways to figure out who meets residency requirements for aid. So here are our 5 primary aid programs in the state, and all of them have residency requirements, as you know, but they don't all have the same ones. So the 30 ways to qualify for resident tuition are also the same 30 ways that meet residency requirements for state work study, passport, and American Indian scholarship. But only 5 of those ways meet the residency requirements for college grant and college bound. So we're going to focus on these 5 today because college bound and the college grant are our 2 biggest programs, of course. And also these 5, actually 3 of the 5 are the most common ways to meet residency requirements for tuition and aid anyway. So what are those 5? They come from this residency statute, RCW 28B 150122. So go ahead and memorize that. Again, for those of you who've been doing this for a while, it should feel pretty familiar. It's 5 different types of students. The first 2 are based on whether or not the student is paying their own way or being claimed on taxes, and is based on domicile. I'll get more into that, but basically financially independent students have to show that they've been domiciled here for a year. Dependent students have to show their parents have been. C is a unicorn because it's a rare beast, meaning that I don't know if anyone will ever see this student. It has something to do with being enrolled continuously since the early 80s. If you do find that student, I want to meet them and shake their hand. D is not necessarily rare, but not super common, and it's really meant for students who maybe their parents moved out kind of toward the end of high school to another state. It also supports a few other students. I'm not going to get into it too in depth, but just know that that's kind of a backup for some students who might have moved later in their high school career. And then E is what you may know as HB 1079. It's our tuition equity law for students who are undocumented or who otherwise aren't eligible or weren't eligible for tuition because of their citizenship status. The way it's written, however, is it doesn't say anything about citizenship. It doesn't say anything about being undocumented. It's really just about, did you go to school for 3 years? Did you graduate from here? And did you continue to live here? So I'm going to be talking more about how this law supports undocumented students, but really it's open to anyone, and that includes U.S. citizens, permanent residents, sometimes F visa students qualify for that, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But really just want to show you that these are the 3 out of these 5, these are the 3 that really are the most common that students use. And again, this is general. I'm not just talking about WASFA filers at this point. This is any student. And also you'll definitely not see the other 2 very often. And again, students who meet these 3 meet the residency requirements for college grant, college bound, and all other residency requirements for other aid programs. So let's delve a little deeper into residency for WASFA filers. So I was talking more generally before. Now I'm going to focus on our WASFA filers. So as Gabi said, folks who fill out the WASFA are those who aren't eligible for federal aid. And most of those students are going to be undocumented students with or without DACA, but there's several other types. I've listed a few here: temporary protected status, pending asylum, various visas. There's other folks, I'm not going to list them all here, but the main point is if a student doesn't qualify for federal aid, they have a chance to find out if they qualify for state aid by filling out the WASFA. And as you all know, your aid programs have residency and program requirements, and so I'm going to be talking about the residency requirements specifically. And there's really 2 ways for these students to meet residency requirements. One's called the 1079 standard, and the other is imaginatively called the non-1079 standard. For those of you who've been around, you might have heard us a few years ago referring to the 1079 standard and the DACA standard. We changed the DACA standard to the non-1079 standard to make it clear that it doesn't just support students with DACA. So I'm going to delve a little deeper into that. So let's start with the 1079 standard. So again, if you remember, this is E. This is our 5th type of meeting residency. And it's a fairly straightforward test that a student has to meet. They have to live in Washington for 36 months right before graduating high school or earning an equivalent to a high school diploma. If the student was a high school graduate, they have to finish their full senior year at a Washington high school. And they have to continuously live here after earning their diploma or equivalent until they go to college. And the 4th piece is they sign an affidavit, which is part of the WASFA. And Gabi talked a little bit about the affidavit, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. One thing I just want to point out about this standard is most of your WASFA filers, if they meet residency requirements, they're going to meet it through this standard, especially your students who are coming to you straight from high school. They more than likely spent their last 3 to 4, if not most of their lives here. So they're going to meet this, and there's really nothing else you have to do. If they meet it, they meet it, and they've met the residency requirement, and now you got to go on to figure out if they meet the other program requirements. So that's one of the takeaways that the WASFA changed in the last few years to kind of guide students toward answering these questions first. And some of you who've seen the changes might have noticed that. And so more about the affidavit. Gabi mentioned this. We really want students to only have to submit this once. It used to be that the affidavit was a paper affidavit, so students were filling that out to get resident tuition, and once they were eligible for state aid, they were filling it out and filing the WASFA potentially. So really, we really want students to be going to the WASFA, filling that out, and the affidavit is filled out as part of that work. And so that means that the residency officers that are at your institutions, if you're public, would benefit from having that residency report that Gabi mentioned, so that they know who is meeting the 1079 standard and they know who can code as a resident for tuition purposes. So if you aren't already doing that, and we highly recommend and encourage that communication flow. Really the only people who should be using the paper affidavit are people who don't fill out the WASFA. So U.S. citizens, permanent residents, other people like refugees and asylees actually qualify for the FAFSA. So again, we want them only submitting once. And another piece is once the student does say yes to all those 3 questions here, there's nothing else to ask them for unless you see conflicting information. So if they've said yes to this, they've met the standard. Now, conflicting information might include something like you see in their admissions materials that they attended a high school outside of Washington. So I'll give you an example of a situation like that. A few years back, we had a student who graduated from a Washington high school, but when the institution looked at their admissions information, they saw that the student actually attended a high school in Egypt for a year. So their immediate response was, wait a second, this student doesn't qualify for 1079. So they reached out to them and found out, oh, actually, the school was an online institution. And they could share documentation to prove that. I think they got something from the school saying, yes, this is an online school. So in that case, it worked out for the student. But you could have a student who maybe reveals that maybe in their admissions application or essay that they every summer go live somewhere else, and so therefore they haven't met that first checkbox of 36 months, and you have to figure out whether or not that counts. So in general, most of your folks filling out the 1079 affidavit as part of the WASFA, it's going to be pretty straightforward, but you might have a few red flags, and you have every right to ask for more documentation. And so, like I said, the 1079 standard, most of your students are going to meet it, but some are not. And so they have kind of a second chance through our non-1079 standard. And that is basically if the student has one of these documents. If they're DACA, if they have deferred action for childhood arrivals, whether it's current or expired, if they have a work permit, known as an employment authorization document, if they have a U or T visa, and or if they're permanently residing under the color of law, which I do not need you to remember what that is. Just know that there are lots of immigration statuses that fall under this. It's known as PRUCAL, and it's really visa types and immigration statuses of folks who are known to be in the country and are at the government knows they are here and don't plan to deport them. And your residency officers know who these are, and we have on our website more information based on immigration status of who would fall under these categories. But I think you're mostly going to see people with DACA or employment authorization documents. And if that's the case, they've now met the 1079 residency standard, which means you can run them through the same process as you would your U.S. citizens. So that means that all 30 ways of getting resident tuition are available to them. Of course, only A through E, R5, meet the requirements for Washington College Grant and College Bound, but they're basically now in a category where you can just run them through your same process that you do in general. So what is that process? So the primary ways that the non-1079 students are going to meet residency requirements, if they have DACA or expired DACA or an EAD, all the different things I had on the previous slide, it's going to be A or B from our slide before. They're either going to be an independent student who has shown they've maintained a domicile here, or they're going to be a dependent student who shows that their parents have had a domicile here. And one thing to point out is that almost anyone can establish a domicile, and that includes undocumented parents. So going back here, if your student you're looking at has DACA, probably that means their parents are undocumented. And if the student is considered financially dependent, then you're looking to their parents, and that's fine that they're undocumented. And you don't actually need to know that the parents are undocumented. So I think for most of you, you've been doing this work. You would just do what you've always done. Look at if you're a private institution, look at your WASFA information to figure out if the person has had a domicile here. If you're a public institution, of course, you're working with your residency office. There are other ways that these students can meet residency. Again, they're eligible for all 30 ways, but in general, these are the two you're going to see. And since these are the two we really wanted to focus on today, these are the two I'm only sharing for that purpose, because we would have a full day webinar if I went over every way. So just one little piece of information, though, that I want to make sure you're aware of is that residency, just to make things fun, has a different definition of financial independence from financial aid, but I'm just making sure you're aware of that just to know it, because really most of the time they align. So in residency world, financially independent students are really just those who aren't claimed on taxes and don't receive significant financial assistance. They're essentially paying their way. So you can guess that aligns most of the time with FAFSA or financial aid definition. So if you have a 26-year-old, they're going to be independent for financial aid purposes. Well, they're probably financially independent for residency purposes, because they're not going to be claimed on taxes more than likely, and most are not receiving significant financial assistance. Just to throw in some unusual cases, and in fact, I think the first one may not be too unusual, but you might have like a 20-year-old who isn't claimed on taxes and is paying their own way, and in the residency world, they would be considered independent, whereas in the FAFSA world, they wouldn't. So usually you're not looking for these students, they're going to come to you. So a student who knows, hey, I'm a resident, but you just don't realize that yet because I'm 20, they're going to come to you and you can ask them for documentation to sort that out. The second case I have here is totally possible, where you would have a married student who, by virtue of being married, is eligible for financial, or is independent for financial aid purposes, but they would, if their parent is paying all their expenses, they actually, for residency purposes, wouldn't be. But you're not really going to know that, again, unless the student tells you. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of this. We're not asking you to do anything different than you were already doing. We just want you to understand that sometimes you might have a student come to you who says, wait a second, I'm actually independent and here's why. So that's really it. I just wanted to go over just a few takeaways that I want to make sure you remember, and that is that in our state, I think we have we have some excellent resources for non-citizen students. We're one of only, not even half our states allow undocumented and other immigrant students to get tuition, in-state tuition and state aid. So many of our students can meet those requirements. Most WASFA filers these days are going to meet residency requirements through that 1079 standard. And remember, we really want students to be only filling out one affidavit through the WASFA. Only FAFSA filers should really be filling out the paper affidavit. And then finally, please, work with your residency office. Share with each other when you see conflicting information. Rely on their expertise. And then, of course, we're here to help you too. So the emails that Gabi put up are also there for you, because you will get, on occasion, some interesting cases. So sometimes we have to help you out with that. So anyway, that's a quick overview. Let's check in with Becky to see what questions have come up, either about what I shared or what Gabi shared.
Sure. Hi, Gail. Thanks so much for sharing the information. This is Becky. There is at least one question as I kind of go back through and look. So can you talk a little bit about how someone might know if someone is a DACA? Is there a paper the student receives for proof for expired or current?
Yeah, great question. So so for people who have DACA, there's really two ways to prove DACA. One is with an EAD, so the employment authorization document. It will have a code of, I believe it is C33. If it's expired DACA, it would just be an expired work permit. There's also a form called a I-797 that the student gets saying you have received DACA, and it also has an expiration date. Of course, if a student doesn't have any of those documents, like especially if they were if it's expired and they just got rid of their stuff, you have to be creative in working with them to figure out how they could prove that they had it. Maybe they have an immigration attorney that they worked with who has some kind of receipt of it. And that's one of the things that residency officers and the public often have to do. They often have to be creative because it's really on them. The way the law is written is that it's on the student to prove whatever that needs to be proven, and the residency officer has the ability to determine when they've received enough information to prove whatever the student is trying to prove.
Great, thank you. Gail, this is a question that you might have already answered. Forgive me if I didn't catch it during your presentation. But the question has to do with, can students use D, so if it's at the very end of their senior year?
So D is, so more specifically D, and I'm going to answer this. This works for all students, and also D is available to our. I'm just going to go up to it. D is also available to our non-1079 residency standard students, because again, all 30 ways are available to them. D is a little bit more specific than that. It is where if a student attended 75% of their junior and senior years here in Washington, they don't have to graduate from here. They could graduate from here. If they spent 75% here in Washington at high school, and their parents had a domicile of at least 1 year in the 5 years prior to that graduation date, then the student can get resident tuition as long as they enroll within 6 months of graduating from high school. So it's not necessarily an uncommon situation. It does come up. I kind of see it as the last chance for a student if they don't meet residency through skipping ahead here to, if they don't meet residency through A or B, if they don't meet the 1079 requirement, this is kind of their last chance.
Okay, great. So I'm going to move the questions back over to Gabi. Gabi, you have had a chance to take a quick look at the questions that have come in, so if you wouldn't mind addressing those.
Hi, thank you. Okay, I'm here now, Becky. One of the questions that was given to me is, how do we correct students' WASFA IDs to Social Security number? So as you know, we do prefer to have students under their Social Security numbers if they have them, or their ITINs. If they fill out their application and don't know it at the time, it automatically generates a 980 number for the students. The WASFA application does. And so when you are wanting to update it to the Social Security, first we do ask that the students go back into their WASFA and add their ID number into their WASFA application, and that for each year. So that will update it in the system. And then what we'd like you to do is you can email us, either me directly or email our wcg@wasac.wa.gov email, through the secure portal is probably better if you're sending any personal identifiable information. Go through the portal. But send us the student's name and their ID numbers, and what we'll do is we're going to look through the system to make sure they don't have awards under any other numbers, and we'll put it all together and merge it into the main ID number. So yes, please send those directly to us and we will work with you to get those corrected. Another question we had is flag for the financial aid administrators. Is there a flag for financial aid administrators when a student selects the special circumstances? When you review the WASFA, there is a section in there that is labeled special circumstances, and you will find a code. It will say either 1 or 2. If you see the 1 in that field, it means that they selected the special circumstances and will not be submitting parent information. You'll also be able to tell if the application has parent information included or not. The value 2 means that they're able to submit the parent information, and you should be having that information there as well. Currently, there's also a field for if the special circumstances has been approved or not. We want you to disregard that field for now because you have to manually do the approval on your end, and you can't update the system at this time. So that one you don't really need to pay much attention to. And let's see, I have timing of the corrections that we were speaking of in the presentation. We are currently working with our IT folks. They are uploading the new documentation into our system from Regent. And this is one of our top priorities. So we're working on it this week and hopefully have it done by the end of this week. But it may run into next week. But hopefully by next week, Friday, we'll have all of these issues addressed and we have worked with you. And again, if any of these issues come up, please contact me directly and I'm happy to work with you on it. Is there any other questions?
So there is a couple more questions. I'm actually going to take a few questions we've received and ask them as one, and I'll go ahead, Gabi, and answer this one.
Okay, thank you.
Has with state aid, so students that might otherwise be eligible for federal student aid, but they might have not registered for selective service and or not filed a tax return when a tax return would have been required for for consideration for federal student aid. The question is, can they be considered for state aid? And the answer is yes, they can be. You can review a student's application because selective service is not required for state aid, nor is filing a tax return for verification, requirement for verification. Now, verification in this case would be required to be completed, but it could be that you could use a similar standard as your non-tax filers. Now, that said, I think we always want to make sure that students do everything that they can to be considered for as much aid as possible. But we have received this question in the past, and I just want to confirm that that they can be considered for state aid only if those are if the items that are holding up their federal aid are not requirements for state aid. I hope that helps. I think this might need to be the last question in terms of timing. Gail, this one might be for you, I think. So it reads like this: do all students that meet residency by using non-1079 standards qualify for WASFA, or is it just DACA?
I hope I can answer this question. So WASFA is open to anyone who does not qualify for federal aid. So that's a long list of students. Federal aid is open to U.S. citizens, permanent residents, refugees, asylees, and some other non-citizens. And then everybody else would fill out the WASFA. Now, whether or not they meet residency requirements would be based on, obviously, if they met 1079 or if they meet the non-1079 residency standards. So so going back to this slide here, the four listed here are really the primary ones that would meet the non-1079 residency standard. And what that really just means is they've passed one test, and then the second test is that you still have to make sure that they meet that they are residents. So they're either a resident through domicile or one of the other 30 ways. So an example would be, maybe you have a student who never had DACA, doesn't have it currently or expired, but they do have an employment authorization document. And this is happening more and more. In fact, we highly encourage you, because many of our non-citizens who do qualify for tuition and aid have an employment authorization document. So we highly encourage you to ask for that when you're trying to figure out if they meet the non-1079 standard, because most will have it. And if they do, they've passed that hurdle, and then it's just, okay, now it's time to run them through the typical questions. Do they have a domicile here, et cetera? So one student that falls in that category that may be surprising to you all is people who are pending asylum. Some of them are going to have an employment authorization document, and prior to a few years ago, they couldn't get resident tuition or aid. But if they have that EAD and they meet one of the 30 ways, they could also get resident tuition and potentially aid. So I hope that answered that question.
Yes. Thank you, Gail. We, at this point, are going to wrap up this session. We really just want to thank you all for joining us today. We will go back through the questions that we received here to make sure that we've answered them. Know that recorded sessions will be posted on our financial aid administrator resource page on wasac.wa.gov. We expect that will take place next week. And for those of you that might be hanging in there, we'd love to see you log into the next session that will be happening in just a few minutes, related to Washington College Grant and Apprenticeship. And if you don't do that, there'll be 3 more sessions tomorrow on various different topics. So thanks so much for your time today.